again to talk about the Hero Gaming System for RPGs. Tonight, instead of doing any kind of build or anything like that of a character or a base or vehicle or anything of that nature, I'm just going to go over some of the basics of the RPG system as used and come up in play. In the hopes that maybe a few of you will watch this and either get something out of it or maybe we'll get an interest in the system and then decide to start joining us and playing with it. It's a good system, it really is, but I will warn you going into this, you will see why people cringe that have dealt with the system but haven't really gotten into it. This is going to be dense. It's going to be crunchy, to use the terminology that's often comes up, and it's going to seem overwhelming to any of you that haven't worked with the system. That said, um, it's quite honestly something that you need to practice. You learn by doing it, so it's going to look overwhelming. But please give it a try if you get an opportunity. It really is worth it. That said, uh, that said, I need to get things working here on my system end of things. We're going to start by looking at what are called characteristic roles. Generally speaking, characteristics roles start out as 9 plus the relevant characteristic divided by 5. So you round to these normally. So as an example, if you had a strength of 13, 13 divided by 5 is roughly 2.6. Actually, it's not roughly, it is 2.6. And you always round or do round normally, so that 2.6 is going to be 3. So to get the characteristic roll for strength, it's going to be 9 plus 3, which is 12, and it's written usually with the little minus sign out behind the number to get the characteristic roll, and it's read as 12 or less in this case. Yes, there are such things as greater than or less than symbols, but it's an easier, simpler notation. Just put a minus sign behind it, and once you use the system enough, you get it. And by the way, some of these things are not that I doubt your math abilities. It's just I want to give an example of what I'm talking about so it doesn't stay this abstract, nebulous, bleh. All right, so that's characteristics rolls. That next brings up skill rolls, because skill rolls often start out as characteristics rolls. This is not 100%, as we will get into, but most skill rolls for the skills that require rolls start out as a characteristic roll. The exceptions, haha, there are always exceptions, right? Knowledge skills, professional skills, science skills, and familiarities. Now, to go into these, knowledge, professional, and science skills generally are not characteristic based, which means that little characteristic divided by 5 is 0, and so you get a base of, or actually, that's not true. That would give you a base of 9 or less, which is what you see in when building things like bases and such as that, vehicles such as that. These start out with a base of 11 or less. Okay, and this is on 3 dice 6. To make a skill check, you draw a characteristic check, you roll 3 dice 6, total up the dice, and you're trying to get that number or less. So this is a roll low type scenario. I know some people hate that because rolling high should be better. Really, it's just a direction. Come on. So that said, knowledge, professional, science skills all start with a base of 11 or less, unless the GM agrees and allows you to buy them generally as an intelligence-based skill, in which case you get the characteristic roll, your intelligence roll. There's some other things that make these skills unique, but we're not going to cover them just now. Maybe a future stream. Familiarities, they're 1 point skills. You're familiar with the subject, you get an 8 or less roll on the skill. Okay, so since they just start out as a characteristic roll, the question becomes, why buy the skill? Well, First and foremost, there is no default system in hero system. If you don't have the skill, you can't perform the skill. Okay, or more to the point, your character cannot. Um, there can be some exceptions to that. GMs vary on the point. Um, some may allow a 6 or less chance on the skill, things like that. But the other reason to buy the skill is that, with the exception of those knowledge, professional, and science skills up here that we mentioned, all skills can be bought up by 1 point by spending 2 character points. These 3 types of skills, knowledge, professional, and science, can be bought up 1 point by spending 1 character point. So skill rolls can outstrip the base characteristic roll that they're based on. So keep that in mind. So that's why you buy the skill. Alright, so skill roll modifiers. Because there are things that can modify the outcome or the level of the skill. One of the first ones is circumstance. If you're in the middle of combat and you're trying to open a lock on a door, you're obviously going to have penalties, minuses to your skill roll, for the fact that this is not ideal circumstance. By the same token, if you're a bad guy and you've brought the safe back to your lair and you've got all the time in the world now to try to crack this thing, you've got good circumstances. Everything's calm, quiet, and per your liking. So this can go either way. It can be a penalty or a bonus, usually added to the or less, the number or less, are subtracted from it, rather than to or from the dice. Then there's the case of skill versus skill. In a skill versus skill, in this case, an example, I'm going to give an example of using perception versus concealment. The character taking the action rolls first. In these two, the person trying to conceal, hide themselves, or hide an object is the one acting. Because if they fail to conceal themselves or the action, then it doesn't matter what the perception roll of the other character is, right? They see them. They failed the concealment. Okay? So the person doing the acting is the concealer. Now, for every -1, for every point the concealer is going to succeed by, they get a -1 on the perception roll for the other guy. So, using our example, we make a roll, and let's say that our concealer only had a familiarity with it, 8 or less. Well, in this case, they rolled 7, so they succeeded by 1. This means the individual trying to perceive them, trying to find them, is at -1 to their skill. And let's say their perception roll is 11 or less. Well, now it's 10 or less. So they throw the dice, and they get a 14. So they failed their perception check. They failed in the skill versus skill roll. Alright? So, again, this kind of seems complicated, but basically, for every point the actor succeeds by, the other person trying to compete against them with another skill, or maybe even with the same skill, gets a -1 to their skill. Alright? What do you mean you can do the same skill? Well, let's say somebody's trying to hack into a computer system using computer programming, and somebody else is trying to stop them using computer programming. So sometimes the skill versus skill can be the same skill. Sometimes, as in the example I've given, it can be different skills. But the main point is you have someone doing something that is being opposed directly by another person, or another character, I guess I should say. Alright, another set of modifiers is complementary skills. This would be things that, say, a certain knowledge, the one they give in the book, I'll use that one. If you are trying to forge a Rembrandt, and you have knowledge skill, Rembrandt paintings, the knowledge skill complements your attempt to forge a Rembrandt. If that makes sense. So knowledge skills and sometimes other skills can be complementary and help out the primary skill. So the first thing is you've got to choose what is the primary skill, or the GM has to. All right. So in this case, I'm going to use comeliness as a complementary skill to a seduction check. In this case, our character is going to be Phelan Dwyer, and she has a seduction of 12 or less. So she's going to try to use her looks to enhance her seduction check. So the complementary characteristic or skill roll is rolled first. So the comeliness check comes first. For every +1, for every 2 successes on the complementary skill she makes, she gets +1 to her primary skill, in this case seduction. So throwing the dice, her comeliness check is an 11 or less again. So this time the dice came up 6, that she made the check by 5. Okay, so 5 divided by 2 essentially is going to be 2.5, and so she gets +3 to her seduction check of 12, which means it's a 15 or less. Throwing the dice on that one, it comes up a 9. So she made the roll by 6. That poor merchant is eating out of her hand. All right? So that's how complementary skills work. Other things that can affect skill rolls. Time. Yes, the chart on the right is the time chart that's used in games for this sort of calculation. Basically, you get +1 for each time increment down the chart that you go, and you get -1 for each increment up the chart. Let's go back to our lock picking example I mentioned earlier. You're trying to pick a lock, okay? In the case of being in your lair, the GM rules that it'd take you 1 minute to pick this lock under normal circumstances. So given you're back in your lair, calm circumstances, let's say you take 20 minutes going at it. That moves you 2 steps from 1 minute to 5 minutes to 20 minutes, 2 steps down the chart, so you get +2 to your lock picking check. Let's say, on the other hand, you're in the middle of combat. You've got to pick that lock on that door to get you and your buddies out of there because you're getting hammered. Well, you don't have a minute to take, so let's say you decide you want to get it done in one phase, one of your actions. Well, that's 2 steps up the time chart, so you're at -2 to your lock picking check to get that door open, to get you and your buddies to safety. So that's how the time can affect. And generally speaking, you're not going to get down here to 1 century on your time checks, but the chart does take that into consideration. Alright, so now we're going to switch gears completely. We're going to get into some of the combat type efforts. And in hero system, you can make presence attacks. You can use your presence, which is a characteristic, to make an attack to try to get people to do what you want them to do. Okay, this is like a policeman shouting "freeze" at a bad guy. That is a presence attack. He is giving an order, trying to use his authority, his presence, to influence the actions of the individual he's attacking. So, presence attack is normally done by D6. You don't need an attack roll or anything else to make a presence attack. So you take your presence stat, characteristic, divide by 5, and that's how many D6 you get. I'm asked by Wondergoon, what if you take 10 years instead of 5? Does it count as if it was 25-year value? So let's go back to the time chart. So so what he's asking is down here on the time chart is 5 years. So he's saying, what if you take 10 instead of 5? Does it go to 25 years on the check, on the time chart? The answer to that is up to the GM. Personally, I would probably not allow 10 years to move it down one, but 15 would. That's a personal call. If you notice, most of these increments are about three multiples of 3 to 5. Some are multiples of 4, like 5 minutes to 20 minutes. But you know, um, basically the rule of thumb I use is if it's not at least halfway or over halfway, you round down. So if you had something that was going to take 5 years and you took 10, that's not halfway to 25, so I would not allow the +1. Other GM's mileage may vary because if you're taking double the amount of time, you know, that should count for something, right? So purely GM call, and you're quite welcome, Wonder Goon. It's what we're here for, right? All right, so back to the presence attack. The other thing to remember about presence attacks, and I've got cats doing presence attacks on each other in my house right now. Uh, half dice are possible. So, an example. What if your presence was 13, kind of like the strength example earlier, uh, except this isn't a characteristics roll. Characteristic roll. 13 divided by 5 is again 2.6, which in this case would mean your presence attacks are 2.5 die 6. Okay, so half dice are possible. This is where some min-maxing comes into this game. By the way, I'm using 5th edition rules. I should have said that up at the top at the beginning, but here it is. I'm using 5th edition rules. So there is some level of min-maxing that starts occurring, and it's simply because there are these nice breakpoints. You don't have to get all the way to 15 presents to get the next bonus. You can just go to 13 and get the half die. So keep that in mind. You may see that if you start playing the game, or if you're new to the game, please don't try to GM it. As you're going to see and probably already see, it is a very dense system. You really need to get your feet under you and get good and wet before you try to run it. So with a presence of 13, you're going to have a 2.5 die 6 presence attack. So as always, there are modifiers, and there are just flat out too many to enumerate. All right, you. By the way, these modifiers usually come in the form of bonus dice on the presence attack damage. So what kinds of things give you a bonus to a presence attack? Well, the violence of your actions. Let's say you wanted to pull Shrek from the movie. His presence attack of, this is where you run away. If you just picked somebody up and threw them through a wall and then turned to his buddies and go, this is where you run away, you've done a violent action that really inclines them to want to obey your order of running away. So you would get a bonus die, maybe 2, or if it was real violent action, like you ripped the guy apart, ripped his arms off and beat him with it for a little bit, and then look at him and go, this is where you run away, you're going to get more dice for that, to make that presence attack. Other things, inappropriate or appropriate situation. An inappropriate situation would be if you're like the Netflix series Daredevil, and you burst into a room full of thugs, and you're already beat up from the thugs you met outside and everything, and you're looking around and go, you guys ready to surrender? That's an inappropriate circumstance. You're going to have dice taken away from your presence attack for that. All right? By the same token, if you do a good soliloquy, a good role-played speech oration, you might get some bonus dice back. So this is why I say modifiers to this presence attack damage. There's too many things that can come up that might give it, and it's completely up to the GM as to whether you'll get some dice or not. Let's see, Rundergoon is giving us an example from one of the games that I ran when he was a player. So in this incident, they pulled off a drug dealer's arm, patted another drug dealer on the shoulder with a severed hand, and in an extremely violent action too. Yes, that is an extremely violent action too. Ripping somebody's arm off and patting their buddy with the hand. Yes, that is going to be an extremely violent action. So keep these things in mind and try as a player to role play out and give yourself these bonuses, these modifiers. Most GMs are happy to see good role play, so we'll gladly give some bonuses for this type of thing. But just as readily, we'll penalize you for doing something silly where you should have known better. So keep that in mind. That's pretty much it for presence attacks. I do mention that they can add or subtract dice to the presence attack. So, but with the presence attack, the neat thing is all you roll is the quote-unquote damage. So, there we go. So, what are the effects of a presence attack? Well, if your damage roll meets the target's presence or ego, the target is impressed. What does that mean? Well, that means they're going to be listening to you. They're going to be paying attention to you. They're not just going to blow you off and say, who cares what he says. They're not going to go back to their card game. All right? Then there's presence or ego plus 10 effect. The target is now very impressed. The target will consider complying with the orders that seem worthwhile. So in other words, our guy who picks somebody up, throws him through the wall, then looks at his buddies and goes, "This is where you run away." This seems like a worthwhile idea. They're going to be inclined to comply with that order. All right? Then we start getting into the real effects. Target's presence or ego plus 20. The target is now awed. Holy crap, this guy is not something we want to tangle with. At this point, the target will not get an action for one phase and is at half DCV. Oh, by the way, I found something out when I was preparing for this. At the ego plus 10 level, they lose a half phase action. So at ego plus 10, you only get, if you are the target of that, you only get a half phase action. At ego plus 20, you lose your next action. And you're at half DCV, defensive combat value. Finally, you're going to obey or comply with most orders. Okay? So, this is really and why I start spending a little more time on these. At ego plus 20 is really honestly where we start influencing, character actions, where the character is just poorly role-playing if they don't go along with it. An ego plus 10 effect, there's kind of a little leeway in there, but, at ego plus 10, you should still be going, maybe I should run away and start backing up or something like that. But at ego plus 20, you've now lost your first action, your next action, you're now at half DCV, and you're going to do what they say. All right? Finally, there's target's presence or ego plus 30. Now the target is cowed. Okay? The target may surrender, run away, or faint. The target is also at 0 DCV. In other words, they're not trying to dodge. They're not trying to get out of the way. They're doing what this guy says. All right? Now, it is very difficult, as we'll find in an example I'll give in a little while. It is very difficult to get to that effect. In fact, let's do an example. An example with an NPC I've created called Lord Gresh, who is an ogre, which is the smallest of the giant kind, and he's going up against a commoner, a normal person. This means he has a presence of 25. Most common people have presence or ego, both are at 10. So, 25 divided by 5 is 5. Normally Lord Gresh here has a 5d6 presence attack. But let's say he has burst through the door, just sending it into splinters, and is looking around going, "This is where you all run away." Okay? Violent action, so I'm going to give him plus 1d6 for it, because it's not extremely violent, it's just violent. it's going to help him out in trying to get them to flee out the back. So he throws his 6 dice, and he gets a total of 23. Comparing that to their presence or ego of 10, this is presence or ego plus 13. So they're at the plus 10 effect level, as it is often called. And they're impressed. Wondergoon does bring up a very good point. It's important to note that presence attacks are not mind control. You can't convince someone to kill themselves with a presence attack. That is also very important. You can convince them to run. You can convince them to stop fighting. You can convince them to drop their weapons. These are all perfectly acceptable, but you're not going to get somebody with a presence attack to kill someone else or to kill themselves. It's just not going to happen. They may faint or may run away, but they're not going to do things like that. This is not mind control. This is presence. This is showing your authority. So our role here, getting back to our example, is presence plus 10 effect. They're inclined to do exactly what he said, so they're probably going to start shuffling and easing towards the back. They're not in full rout, but getting out of here is probably a good idea. Alright, so that's presence attacks. And so now, as you already saw, because I clicked the button too soon, we get into combat. And so our basic attack roll in Hero System is an 11 plus the attacker's OCV, offensive combat value, minus the defender's DCV. Yes, you have to do a little bit of math, but it's simple addition and subtraction, so it really shouldn't be that big of a deal, right? It's 11 plus the attacker's OCV minus the defender's DCV. Both of the attacker's OCV and the defender's DCV can be modified. Alright, you have a base OCV and DCV that's based on your dexterity, the character's dexterity, I should say. Okay, so things that can modify OCV or DCV. Combat skill levels. Say +3 with flails, which is a type of melee weapon, or +1 with hand-to-hand combat. These are combat skill levels, and they can modify both OCV and DCV with some exceptions, but that's for another stream too. Maneuvers can affect OCV and DCV, such as a maneuver is a martial strike. Okay, this is a martial art maneuver, and it gives a bonus of 0 to your OCV when you use it, but a +2 to your DCV when you use it. Bottom line, martial artists know how to strike, but keep their defenses up, right? That includes boxing, kung fu, karate, any of these types of things, so they can modify your OCV and your DCV. Equipment can modify OCV and DCV. So if you have a medium metal shield, this is going to give you +2 to your DCV. Okay? So, you know, because it can get up and get in the way of attacks. So it helps you defend yourself. Helps you keep you from getting hit. And then there are a few maneuvers that we call abort maneuvers. And this is something like dodge. You can always choose to try to dodge the incoming attack. It's going to modify your OCV and DCV. Now, these are called abort maneuvers because if you haven't acted that segment, you can abort your next action, which if you act on that segment, it's one of your phases, but you haven't acted yet, you just abort that action to do your dodge instead. So that means you dodged instead of doing your attack that you could have possibly done. Alright? But these abort maneuvers can also be, if you haven't acted that segment, you can abort your next action so you don't get it to perform this dodge. Why might you want to do that? Well, because it gives you a +3 to your DCV. That's pretty hefty when you think about 11 plus the attacker's OCV minus the defender's DCV. Let's say the attacker only has a OCV of 3. You've negated his OCV by doing a dodge instead of just standing there and trying to take it. Alright, so there are 2 types of attacks, two typical types of attacks. I will use typical because there's actually lots of attacks, and we'll kind of go brush up against that. All right, but there are two typical attacks, two basic types of attacks. The first of these is just simply called normal. I put quotes around it. You usually won't see the quotes around it. They are just called normal attacks. With a normal attack, the total of the dice is the amount of stun damage done. There are two types of hit points in Hero System. There is body, which when you run out of body, you are dead. Then there is stun, and when you run out of stun, you are unconscious. So that's an important thing to keep in mind too. When you run out of body, you're dead. When you run out of stun, you're unconscious. So with a normal attack, the total of the dice that you throw is the amount of stun damage that's been done. Body damage is a little more complicated to calculate. For every 1 that comes up on that dice roll, you do 0 body. For every 2 through 5, you do 1 body damage. And for every 6 rolled, you do 2 body damage. Alright? So, the next point to bring up, well, let's go back and talk about that for a little bit. This is why there's some amount of double counting, and I'll show you a technique for doing that relatively easy in an example combat in just a second. Because for a normal attack, you've got to go through this sequence of counting up how many 1s that were rolled, because you get 0 for them, or just move them to the side. 2 through 5, you do 1 body for each of those die, and a 6, you do 2 body. All right, maybe some of you are already seeing the shortcut that can be done to make that a little quicker, but we'll get to that. And with normal attacks, all of your PD or ED, because physical defense or energy defense, all of it is applied. So physical defense is against things like punches, bullets, knives. It's a baseball bat. It's against physical concussions and so forth. Energy defense, fire, heat, cold, electricity. It's just what it says. It's defense against energy type attacks. So, with normal attacks, you get all of your PD or ED. That means if you have on some armor, you get your armor's PD or ED against the attack, as well as your innate one for your character's PD or ED. Alright? The next type of attack, typical attack, is called the killing attack. The total of the dice on a killing attack is the amount of body damage done. Alright? So, with normal attacks, the total on the dice is the amount of stun done. With killing attacks, it's the amount of body damage done. Stun damage for a killing attack is figured by rolling another die 6, subtracting 1 with a minimum of 1, and you multiply that by the body done to get the stun. Okay? I'm made an emphasis of minimum of 1 because I've recently seen another person's videos going over these basics where they had it where you could get a 0. You cannot get a 0 with this roll. You will have a minimum stun multiplier, as it's called, of 1. Alright? There is also a power advantage that can raise this multiplier. Alright? It's called increased stun multiplier. Generally speaking, you get a +1 with that advantage on your attack, but it can be bought multiple times if the GM allows. As a GM, I can say you've got to come up with a real good reason to convince me of why your killing attack should do even more stun. So, there we have the stun damage. Here's the other part about killing attacks, though, that makes them really, really nasty. Only RPD, resistant PD, or resistant ED, reduces the body damage taken. If you don't have resistant defenses, you have no defense against a killing attack. Zero. Nada. Okay? If you have no resistant PD or resistant ED, that killing attack does its damage to you, period. No subtraction. Normally, PD and ED subtract from the damage you take. But again, if this is a killing attack, you better have what's called resistant defense, which usually comes for a squishy human from things like armor, force field, force wall, etc. Your basic PD and ED you have for being a living, breathing human being is not resistant. Killing attacks, by the way, are things like knives, bullets, weapons, essentially. Wonder Goon makes another comment. Any GM that allows more than +1 to the stun multiple should get a drug test to see how much crack they've smoked in the past months. I don't know that I'll go quite that far. He's a fellow GM as well as a player in some of my games. I don't know that I'll go quite that far, but I will say the GM needs to really think about what they're doing to allow more than a +1 stun multiplier through that advantage, because as we will see, they can be pretty horrendous as it is. So moving back along, if you do have resistant defense, then you get your full PD and ED against the stun damage. So that PD and ED that's not resistant, you get it against the stun damage as long as you have some resistant PD or ED. Again, if you don't have resistant PD or ED, you do not get any defense against a killing attack. If you do have some, you at least get all of it, your defense, against the stun part of the damage. You still only get your resistant PD or ED against the body damage of a killing attack. So, again, no resistant defense, you have no defense. Alright? Killing attacks do exactly what they say. Kill. In a superhero game, 4-color like you see, or like you used to see in most of the 90s and earlier comics, heroes should not probably have killing attacks. But I want to do more stun that you can do with that high, when you get a high stun multiplier. Not a good enough reason to get a killing attack. And GMs should not allow it. Okay? Point blank, blunt up front with you. In 4-color superhero type campaigns, heroes should not have killing attacks because they do exactly that. Kill. Okay? You hit a squishy normal human with even a low dice killing attack, you have left them severely hurt. And that is usually a no-no for the heroes. They're good guys, after all. Alright? So, as one of Wonder Goon's characters would say, you're going to jail for using that killing attack. Quite possibly, anyway. Alright. So then there's this idea of knockback. Okay? Attacks can knock you back. They can stagger you. You see it, and again, you see it in the comic books all the time. You see it in movies all the time. Somebody gets hit by something and is thrown backwards, right? Okay. This is usually used in superheroic campaigns. It can be used in heroic level campaigns, especially with large or hard-hitting attacks. So what would that mean? Well, in my example with Lord Gresh, because he's going to come back and visit us here in a little bit, he is an ogre. He is a giantkin. He stands about 9 to 12 feet tall. Okay? His fists are as big as most of our heads. So if he punches you, that's a large attack. Given his strength, it's also a hard-hitting attack. So if he punches, it's probably going to do some knockback. But if he uses a weapon, like a spear like he uses, or a sword, that is a narrow edge that he's using, and so it's probably not going to do knockback, and there's probably no reason to do a check for it. Alright? So, this is knockback. It's done by normal and killing attacks, though there's a little different mechanics for each type. So it's calculated as follows. For normal attacks, you take the total, not damage, the total body damage done by the attack. You subtract any damage, body damage that was used going through a wall. So like if somebody had to punch through the wall to get to the target, then the wall took up some of that body damage with its defense and its own body. So you subtract that out, okay? Then you roll 2d6, and remember I said this gets crunchy, and you subtract that. And then finally, if the target has any knockback resistance, you subtract the knockback resistance. But in the end, the remainder, if it's a positive number, is how far backwards the character gets thrown in game inches, which a game inch is 2 meters. Alright? So, let's go through that again. You take the total body damage done for a normal attack. You subtract if they punched through any kind of wall or intervening material. Okay? You subtract the total of 2d6. And then there is such a thing as knockback resistance. If the target has any of that, you subtract that. Anything left over is how many game inches you've been knocked back. For killing attacks, the only real difference is that you roll 3d6 instead of 2d6 on that subtraction roll. The thinking behind this is that a killing attack is usually more pointed, more directed, it's over a smaller area. So it doesn't have that momentum, that push that throws you back that a normal attack does. Because a normal attack is just trying to stun you. Okay? So that's knockback. Other types of attacks that come up in the game, there are mental attacks. There are attack powers that attack the mind. Okay? They are defended against with mental defense. Imagine that. So yes, you can have some mental defense. The basic character, the basic normal human, starts with no mental defense. You have to buy it as a power. Then there are flash attacks. Flash attacks are attacks against a sense or sense group, like sight, or taste, or smell, or hearing. So these are attacks against a sense or sense group, or multiple sense groups. Okay. Sorry, got a little notification there and have somebody touting another game. Alright, so flash attacks. Yes, flash attacks. They're against a sense or a sense group. And there is flash defense that can be used to block the effects of a flash attack. Then there are attacks like drains, transfers, dispels, suppress, and transforms. Transforms and transfers are different things. And these are defended against with power defense. Now, none of these types of attacks do knockback because they're not actually pushing on you or anything like that. Alright? Then finally, there are attacks like darkness, which negates a sense or sense group. Well, wouldn't flash defense work against that? No. Flash is a momentary, just what it says, it's a momentary burst that puts the sense or sense group out of commission for a time being. Darkness drops an area where that sense simply does not work. Alright? Darkness has to be countered by something else. And entangles, just what they say, this is like a net or a bolo. You know, it wraps up the target and keeps them from being able to move and act. Alright? So now, we're going to go into an example, not going to leave you hanging, an example of a combat phase. So we're going to have in one corner, Lord Gresh the Ogre. These are his combat stats. He has a strength of 35, a dex of 15, constitution of 23, body of 27, OCV and DCV of 5, PD of 5, ED of 5. In both cases, 3 of his 5 defense is resistant. That's what's been the parentheses with the 3. So 3 of his defense is of that 5 defense is resistant because he's a bony, horny, skinned ogre. His recovery is 10, endurance is 50, stun is 52. He has plus 3, remember those combat skills, with hand-to-hand combat, and he's using a long spear, which is a 2d6 killing attack. Now, a long spear has a strength minimum of 13, so he has, let's see, what is it, 22 strength above the strength minimum, so he can add damage with excess strength to his attack, which brings it up to 3d6 plus 1 with his strength. Alright? There's some other factors about killing attacks, obviously, that I haven't covered. I'll cover in another stream. I just want to get the basics down with this one. In the other corner is our character Phelan Dwyer, and those are her combat stats. Share strength 13, dex is 14, con 15, and so forth. I figure you can read. So, they're stacked up against each other. She's wielding a flail and a medium metal shield. She has banded mail on that grants her 6 resistant PD and 6 resistant ED, and she is swinging a war flail, which is a 1d6 killing attack, also with a strength minimum of 13, so she has no extra strength, so it just does the 1d6 damage. But it does have that advantage on it of plus 1 stun multiplier. Aha! So we're going to see how that works and why Wondergoon and I both agree any GM that allows more than a plus 1 stun multiplier is in need of seeking help. Alright. So, now we go into combat. The basic combat roll is again 11. I should say, Lord Gresh has a higher dex. It's just 1 point, but it's 1 point. So combat starts on what we call segment 12, because segment 12, everybody gets an action unless they have a speed of 1. All right. So since both of them have speeds of, Gresh has speed 2, Phelan has a speed 3, they both get an action on segment 12, which is where combat starts. But Gresh has a 15 dex, he goes first. So his combat roll, 11 plus his OCV, which he's going to use his 3 combat levels in hand-to-hand in OCV. So he has his base of 5 plus those 3. It's going to be minus Phelan's DCV. She also has a base of 5, but she also has a shield, so she gets plus 2 more. So when you do that math, Gresh needs a 12 or less to make contact with his long spear. So he throws his dice, and uh-oh, he got a 7. That's definitely less than 12. So he hit. So now he rolls his dice on his 3d6 plus 1 killing attack. So the red dice are his attack, his damage. The blue die, or dark die, is his stun multiplier die. So his total body done is 9 body, because we got 2 3s, 6, plus 2 is 8, plus 1 more is 9. So he did 9 body. The stun multiplier is 2 minus 1, so that's 1. So he only did 9 stun with this. That's not too impressive so far, right? Okay. So what does Phelan take in damage? Well, she has 6 resistant PD from her banded armor. So 9 minus 6, she took 3 body damage. Ouch. Since she has resistant defense, she gets all of her PD against the stun damage. So she has 6 from her banded armor, and she has 5 of her own. So that's a total of 11. 9 minus 11 is negative 2, which goes to 0. But there's a caveat. Either of the 2 types of attacks do at least 1 stun for every body that gets through. So, since she had 3 body get through her defenses, she takes 3 stun. Alright? Hopefully that makes sense. If not, rewind, watch again. It's not like we have, you can't keep watching this over and over and over again depending on what you need. Okay? So she took, in this attack, she took 3 body and 3 stun. It's a flesh wound. Okay? It also should be noted that Gresh, using his full 35 strength, used 7 endurance for this attack. So endurance is a measure of how much energy you have to fuel attacks and feats of strength and things like that. So now it's Phelan's turn. She starts out with the base 11. She's putting her 3 levels with flail, since she's using a flail, and her 1 with hand-to-hand combat all into OCV. So she's got 5 plus 4 for her OCV, or 9. And Lord Gresh doesn't have a shield or anything like that, so his DCV is 5. So, when we add that all up, Phelan has a 15 or less chance to hit Lord Gresh with her flail. Rolling the dice, she rolls a 9, definitely less than 15. So again, the dark die is the stun multiplier. So she did 6 body, got a great connect on that hit. And her stun multiplier is 5 minus 1. Oh, wait. Flails get +1 stun multiplier. So the -1 is canceled by the +1, and the stun multiplier is 5. So this attack did 6 body and 30 stun. Alright, do we now get a picture of why Wondergoon and I are in agreement that anyone who allows more than a +1 stun multiplier advantage is crazy? As Wondergoon is now saying, a most palpable hit, a good solid hit. So, how much damage does Lord Gresh take? Gresh has 3 resistant PD from being a tough ogre. He doesn't have on any armor or anything like that. So he has 6 body. So he took 6 body, but his 3 resistant PD, subtract 3 from that. So he also took 3 body total. And since he also has resistant defense, all of his PD counts against the stun. So that's 5, because again, he doesn't have any armor, but he did have 2 non-resistant PD. So that's 30 minus 5 is 25. And at this point, Lord Gresh is probably rethinking his charge in and strike attitude. And Phelan, for her part, only used 2 endurance for her 13 strength that she used in the attack. So, quite a difference in what happened. And again, that stun multiplier can lead to some really nasty things. Alright? So once again, GMs out there that may be watching this, think twice about allowing anyone, even your NPCs, to have more than a +1 advantage on that stun multiplier. Yeah. So let's look at another scenario, and let's look at what would have happened if Gresh had punched, which is a normal attack, and large, as we've discussed, instead of using his spear. Well, his punch, we're going to assume he hit again. His punch would normally do 35 divided by 5 is 7d6 damage. So throwing the 7 dice for the normal attack, I count them by, I group them together, the dice together in groups of 10. So we have 6 and 4, which is 10. We have 4 and 4, which is 8, plus 2 is 10. So that's 20, 25 stun. Alright, so his punch did 25 stun. Then, to get the body, I regroup matching up 6s and 1s. Because remember, with a normal attack, a 1 does no body, and a 6 does 2. So in essence, they cancel out. Makes sense? So if you have an equal number of 6s and 1s, as we do in this case, the body damage done by the attack is simply the number of dice that were thrown. And in a matter of a few seconds, you've double counted these dice to get both the stun and the body by doing some simple grouping that makes the addition easy. Okay? Wonder Goon, let's see. If you hate your players, let your NPCs have all the stun multiples you desire. If you hate yourself, let your PCs have all the stun multiples they want. Exactly. So we're back to that stun multiplier on killing attacks. But, if you hate your players, tack on the stun multiplier bonuses. If you hate yourself, allow the players to do that. Alright. So now let's look at the knockback damage. So the total body, remember, we start with the total body done by the attack, not that body that gets through, the total body done. We subtract any walls that it went through, which he didn't go through a wall, and we subtract 2 die 6, which is in this case 6, and we subtract any knockback resistance Phelan may have had, which she had none. So 7 minus 6 is 1. So she took 1 inch of knockback. So she is now 1 game inch away, staggered backwards. That's 2 meters. She is also prone, so it's going to take a half phase action for her to get back to her feet. And she is outside of the range of her flail, because she's now 2 meters away. A flail don't reach 2 meters. Alright? 2 meters for Americans is about a little over 6 feet. That's right? Yeah. Okay? So, she can't attack. She can move back into range after getting up because she's still got a half phase action. But half of her half phase went just to getting back to her feet due to the knockback. So, the bottom line is Lord Gresh may have done far less body because she has 11 total defense, so she would have taken no body, but she would have taken more stun, plus then the knockback effects. In ways, he would have been better just going ahead and punching her than trying to stab her with a pointy stick. Alright? So these are also some of the things that you have to take in mind. And another reason why you want to angle, unless the genre you're playing with, why you want to angle your players back towards normal attacks anyway. They are typically going to do, on average, the same damage class, the same level of attack. Normal attack is going to do more stun than a comparable killing attack, a same level killing attack. Now, by same level, I don't mean number of dice. I need to do a video on damage classes and comparing attacks as well. But the bottom line is normal attacks are going to tend to knock people out faster. Killing attacks are just going to kill them. Alright? You can get lucky, as Phelan did in our example, and get a high stun multiplier and knock somebody out real quick with a killing attack. But that's the exception, not the rule, because that stun multiplier is 1d6 minus 1 normally. Alright. That's all I've got. So, unless there are comments from the gallery, questions, comments, or dirty looks, I think we're to the end of our little session here, going over some of the basics. I definitely recommend maybe watching this a couple of times. Perhaps get together with some friends and practice a little bit. It does get easier the more you do it. It's like anything else. Alright, Wondergoon saying great stream. I'm going to say great stream. Call it a night. If you have any comments or anything, make sure to leave them for me. And we'll talk to you again soon. Hopefully. Until then, good night.